In this podcast, we discuss the different types of radiation present in our modern world, the damage that radiation from our mobile devices such as cell phones and laptops is causing to our bodies, and how to minimize the damage from these devices. Welcome to Anti-Aging Hacks. On this podcast, I interview top experts in anti-aging and longevity, and we discuss the best natural and medical solutions to bring you practical advice you can apply right now to fight back against aging. We also discuss sneak peeks at some huge scientific advancements coming in the near future that will allow us to age backwards. I am your host, Faraz Khan. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Today, my guest is Daniel DeBaun, who is an internationally recognized and influential expert in electronic emissions and EMF protection, with a particular focus on the effects of exposure of mobile devices such as laptops, iPads, and cell phones. He's the author of the popular book Radiation Nation. He's also the inventor of DefenderShield, an effective radiation technology to prevent damage from these devices. Hello, Daniel. I'm excited to have you on the show today, and that is because we've only lightly touched on EMFs on the podcast before, but haven't had a chance to talk to an expert yet.
Faraz, thanks so much for inviting me. I really do appreciate the opportunity to chat about this with your audience and in you in particular. So let's get going.
Let's start with you. What is your background and how did you become an EMF expert?
I started quite a number of years ago. I worked for the Bell System and I ran the technical laboratories that evaluated all the various technologies that we speak about today. In addition to that, I also established the standards. My organizations actually put out the definition of the standards for telecom technologies to meet. So I was pretty heavily involved with these technologies that are around us for years and years at a very technical level. How I actually got involved with electromagnetic radiation, of course, when I used to study technologies, I would always look for crosstalk, which is the interference of one technology with another. Ironically, I never looked at one technology to a human. It turns out that maybe 6-7 years ago, my sons, as sons typically do when they come visit, they put their laptops on their lap and you lose them for hours at a time. And my wife says to my sons that I want grandchildren. That can't be good for you. And so I thought about it for a second. I said, these power levels are so low. I doubt very sincerely there can be any sorts of damage. But I said, well, let me take a quick look. So I went on to the research side of these technologies and looked for impacts to the body that we maybe knew by now. And I was shocked. My sons had a laptop on their lap, and within 3 to 4 hours, there could be immobility of the sperm, and it can be long term. So I was sort of surprised because I was been in the industry for so many years, and was unaware that there was a body impact to the environment, to technologies that we use around us every day. So
as an engineer with background in the space, you had to do something, right?
I actually built them. A device. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, although I was in electronics my whole life. And I built them some technologies that actually shielded them from using the laptops, not allowing the signals to be transmitted into the groin area. Their friends liked it, and their friends' friends liked it. And all of a sudden, I became more and more involved, bringing solutions to the marketplace. In fact, even for that matter, writing a book on the subject, trying to help all of us understand what are the ramifications of exposures. And so a few years ago, I released Radiation Nation along with my son, which is a discussion about what it is and what do we know from science on what it is and what are the things we can do about it. So believe it or not, I was a reluctant participant as electromagnetic radiation expert, but I had a lot of years of experience.
Well, it seems like you stumbled onto that, which is where a lot of the best discoveries in the world have actually come from. So I read your book a few days ago, and it really changed my perspective. I've been worried about EMF for a while, and I've been starting to turn off some of my devices, but some of the information you have just blew me away. So before we get into that, including the sperm immobility, I want to talk about, were you at the Bell Labs, the AT&T Bell Labs?
Yeah, that's where I started quite a number of years ago. And I'm not going to tell you when, because then I give my age away.
That's all good. You're on the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast, so you're much younger than your years anyway. So no need to tell your age. What I wanted to ask you, Daniel, Bell Labs created the transistor which makes our cell phone and computers work, cellular telephone technology, solar cells, lasers, and satellites. The innovation that came out of those labs is astounding. So you must be a really smart guy, and two, you must have been surrounded by some of the smartest folks on the planet.
I often tell the story. I walked into a friend of mine's office, and he was signaling for years and years and years. And he was telling me about this dream he had. And the dream was that he had decided he could invent an encoding to put more data content on a twisted pair of wires. When I went in, I understood the word hello. And when I left, I understood the word goodbye. Everything in the middle, I did not understand what he was talking about. He was so bright about this subject. And you're right. Everyone around me was so bright. It really humbled me having a chance to work with such wonderful, bright people.
Well, congratulations on having really good credentials then. Let's get started with what I'm thinking is we should start with some definitions. In your book, you've mentioned there's two different types of EMFs. So what are EMFs and what are the two different types of EMFs?
There's two types. Anything that's electronic that operates motors, hair dryers, vacuum cleaners, all of those devices, when they consume the energy, at the same time, they emit emission called extremely low frequency emission. Almost all of it is 60 hertz. In other words, it operates at 60 cycles per second. When you talk about emission from the wall, from the lights around us, anything that operates electricity, it's generating typically 60 hertz of emissions. And these kinds of things are actually fairly important because they actually influence the body. We know through lots of research that there's impacts at a variety of levels, including, by the way, the heart. When you're close to these kinds of things, it does adjust the heart's traditional rhythmic flow. So there's the extremely low frequency stuff. And then there's this stuff we have in our laptops, our tablets, our cell phones, and that's called RF, radio frequency signals. They allow us to transmit information from our devices to the Wi-Fi, from our cell phone to the cell tower. These are typically 1 to 2 gigahertz. That's 1 to 2 billion cycles per second. So all of a sudden, it's moving much, much more fast than the 60 cycle stuff from your house, from your electrical wiring. And it can be come up with its own set of problems for the body. And so you're worried about that transmission because it's a three-dimensional, three-axis signal. That is, if you put your finger up in front of your head and you look at the tip, pretend there's a tiny little ball. It's opening up, opening up, opening up, opening up. It fills the entire room. And for a cell phone, for example, it can go up to 4 or 5 miles. It's omnidirectional. It's going in all directions. In other words, it's hitting you while it's hitting the cell tower. So there's those kinds of environmental changes that are occurring. That is, all these devices in our lives, they're all transmitting something, and they're all omnidirectional, and they're filling the room.
So the two types are ELF, which, as you said, super low frequency, mainly from circuit boards or electrical wiring. Hopefully this is the low impact one. And then the other one is the radio frequency, which comes from the cell phone towers, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, which is in every device basically that we carry around with us. And this is moving much faster and maybe more problematic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Good characterization. And now I'm going to explain what a radio frequency signal is around 2 gigahertz. Believe it or not, your microwave oven, should you use it, I don't, but if you were, it generates a 2.3 gigahertz omnidirectional signal. It heats the water in between the cells. The cells oscillate, and voila, all of a sudden you have cooked meat. So a RF signal is a microwave signal that's touching your body.
Wow, that cannot be good. And I want to
Nope.
I want to come back. I want to come back on the microwave as a topic. Before we dive in, Daniel, as you know, as humans, we are very visual creatures. If we cannot see something, then it is very hard for us to imagine it. And so, as we're learning about some of the dangers of this radiation, there's still a lot of skeptics out there saying, oh, no, that's not true because they can't see it. And I think in your book, you referenced that the same thing happened with cigarette smoking in the 70s and 80s. We couldn't see the damage, so we didn't believe it for a long time. So let's first talk at the smallest level on the body. What changes or damage can EMF radiation cause to the cells in our bodies?
There is two forms of radiation that have been around for a very long time. The Earth itself generates a DC something around 12 cycles per second. Very, very, very low, extremely low frequency stuff. And then, do you know when you look at the sun and you see all the lights and all the colors, that's called visible electromagnetic radiation. It's actually a form of radiation that comes from our environment. Those are the two that have existed since the dawn of man. Everything you and I have talked about so far is man-made. It's the stuff that's becoming involved in our lives, never existed before. And in fact, only for the last 10 or 15 years do we have any growing track record of understanding this problem. But to the point you made before, when I was 12 years old, quite a number of years ago, and I'm not going to tell you still. and I smoked cigarettes because I wanted to be a big man. And I often point out that in hindsight, research knew at that time that there were dangers, but it wasn't public domain. It was only public domain after the smoking and cigarette industry began losing in court. And so for 20, 30 years, the damage was occurring. Science knew it was a damaging and direct link to cancers with lung cancer and smoking, yet the public domain didn't know until they started losing in court. So I use that parallel because research does know quite definitively that there are damages to the body down to the cell level, and it also has influence to the body function. And the question you were asking, well, what can happen down to the cell level? And what we know is that it can generate an oxidative stress to the cell. It actually says, I don't like what this exposure is doing to me. And it actually can create a sequence of events that actually can break down the cell and can actually penetrate the cell with calcium. And then you can have oxide buildup inside the cell, and you can have DNA damage, mutated cells. So it can be really down at the really lowest common denominator of the body. So we know from research, we actually now know how the cell breaks down and why it breaks down. It irritates the cell membrane and it breaks down. So oxidative stress, of course, compounded with other stresses in the body, can actually become pretty lethal to the body.
What about studies that have been done on people?
Well, here is a significantly statistical study that was done in the U.S. by the federal government, the National Toxicology Program. They went out to set with the objective of finding no problems. And sadly for them, they found significant increases in cancer rates. Also, right after that, there was a similar study in Ramazzani Institute out in Europe, out of Italy. And they did virtually the same thing. And they found virtually the same kind of results. So now we have these very, very large epidemiology studies that found similar results. And so if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet that that's not a problem. I would say it's statistically significant evidence led by epidemiology that's always a leader in research and science, telling us our environment and how we respond to toxins.
Yeah, that definitely seems like some scary stuff. And I looked at the study. You had listed the study in your book, which I researched a little bit. So again, crazy stuff. Let's dive in deeper. What I wanted to do next is to talk about the devices that we use in our lives and how those could be impacting or the effects they could be having. So let's start with cell phones, Daniel. How many emissions does a cell phone have?
Wonderful question, Faraz. When you would think that there is a transmitter that's connecting to a cell tower, and you need to be worried about that potentially. Well, actually, as you pointed out earlier in your show, there's the Bluetooth transmitter, that's 0.3 watts per kilogram. There's the Wi-Fi that can be up to 6 kilowatts. And there's the cell connection, which is 1.6 watts. And so you can have at least 3 transmitters out of one cell phone. And you can have an additional extremely low frequency emissions because of as a byproduct of the cell phone itself. So you can actually have as many as 4, believe it or not.
That is crazy. So let's dive into those. Thank you for giving the signal strengths, and I'd like to kind of talk about what those mean. What's a safe signal strength? So you said wireless is 1.6 watts per kilogram, Bluetooth is 0.3 watts, Wi-Fi could be 6 kilowatts. What's safe for the human body?
They argue none. And the reason I say that is because it's not existed in our environment. Our body actually doesn't know how to deal with such a low-level signal. So they talk about it has to be below 0.3 watts, and you should be safe. But they weren't fully aware of the standards and study work that was going on. From a conservative point of view, you really sort of want to watch that you don't have prolonged exposures, long durations with the technologies from your cell phone to your skull, because it's literally potentially interfering. If you use your cell phone and you use it for 5 minutes, you don't have any real concerns whatsoever, because it really does take time before there's a cumulative effect of these kinds of things. So you're pretty safe. But if you're on it for an hour at a time, or your kids are, that's when you start getting a little bit more concerned about these kinds of exposure.
Okay. Let's talk about where we hold or store our cell phones as we walk about our day all day. So, for example, men are putting their cell phones in their pant pockets, which is very, very close to their reproductive organs. Women probably do the same, either in their purses or in their pants. And definitely, I've seen girls that put it in their breasts,
right,
or in their bra, I should say.
Right.
And then finally, as you mentioned, we're talking on the cell phone against her head, against the brain, which is also dangerous. So let's talk about those 3 areas. So the reproductive organs, the breasts, and then the brain.
Okay, we talked about the brain a little bit. It really takes very, very little power from a cell phone, and you put 3 transmitters, a Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and a cell phone transmitter, all to your head. That can be pretty dangerous. The breast, we already know from research that you can get, there is, they call it toxicity syndrome. It actually, the transmitters on the cell phone against the breast can actually mark the breast. And we know that there's statistical significance when you have it on your breast. It can convert to cancers over time. That's been pretty clear. We've talked a little bit about men and the impact of the sperm. What we haven't talked about is more long-term. I don't know if you've noticed the trends for the male fertility is actually declining pretty rapidly. If you go to a specialist, one of the first things they're going to ask you is, do you have a cell phone in your pocket? For that reason. But here's something that really is not spoke about, but what could be as problematic, if not worse. When you have a cell phone transmitting constantly in your back pocket and you're a 12-year-old girl, we know through study work that it can impact the egg. We know it can disrupt the egg and can create actually a mutated cell. That mutated cell can actually be transferred into subtending generations. So there's a bit more sinister kinds of results from a cell phone.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. If we look at the birth rates or the fertility in the Western world, it's declining very rapidly, as you noted, against the developing world. And so you ask yourself, what's the difference? Well, one, they're maybe eating not so many packaged foods. So yes, food could be a challenge because now everything's in a box here. But two, it's all these EMFs. We're hyper connected across the country and in North America, for example. And so maybe that's also causing challenges. And the point you made with the DNA or the cells being mutated, the mitochondrial DNA is passed from the mother to the child. And so if that mitochondrial DNA gets damaged, then that's just going to go into the kid. And that's going to be the damaged cell of the DNA.
That's right. Exactly. And we talk about that kind of stuff. What we haven't talked about is like with a cell phone, when you put it to your head, we've had an increase in brain cancers for the last 10 years. And it's grown 2% compounded every year for the last 10 years. Why is that happening? I'm not even worried about that as much as I am the foggy brain, the anger, the other biological neurological impacts to the brain of young kids. The standard was created 35 some odd years ago. It was based on the use of a 6-foot male occasionally using a cell phone. It allowed the signal to go into 1 inch into the 6-foot male's head, and it allowed the temperature to increase by 2 degrees. Remember the thermal thing related to microwave? It's allowed to heat up by 2 degrees. So at that time, we thought that would be the use of a cell phone. Well, boy, were we wrong. You have children 6 years old that are calling their grandmother, talking for an hour at a time. That signal goes right through their head. And it heats up their head. What is the impact? I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, the standard's completely outdated, as you said. It was,
of course.
It was, what is it, 1996? Where
yeah, right. And they were constraining the thermal impact, not the biological impact.
Right.
And of course, almost everything you and I have chatted about is biological.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I agree. Now, the only plus that I see in this generation, and I never thought I'd be saying this, but people are texting way more than they're actually talking on the phone.
Right.
So
that's right.
So they're saving themselves from brain problems and brain cancer, but at the expense of just ADHD, just non-communications and not actually building real relationships with people. But we digress. I had a follow-up question on the sperm mobility. As you mentioned, it reduces that by 25% within a very short period of time. Is that
3 to 4 hours?
3-4 hours. Is that because the mitochondria is being affected or the cells being destroyed?
No, it's the mitochondria that's where the cells actually become more and more immobile as the exposures occur. That is actually a point in time study, but we know for sure that there's more long-term stuff going on.
Yeah.
So it's not just the reproduction of the sperm itself that recovers, but it's the ability to recover that's becoming more problematic, as you pointed out before.
Got it. And anything to do with mitochondria, I really worry about because that is the energy production of our body. And if we're reducing the energy production, then one, the sperm can't swim fast enough to get to the egg, which is what problem in itself. But two, day-to-day life, we just need more energy to perform better. And if we're cutting that out, that's very bad.
So there's a myriad of kind of subtending stuff that goes on when you use a cell phone in your head. It's not just the cell. In fact, as I said before, I'm more worried about the corollary stuff that's going on, not the cancer to the cell, frontal lobe cancer cell. It's the other stuff. Like, for example, if you put a cell phone next to your bed, and it's pinging all night, you may have problems sleeping. Why? Your melatonin, the stuff that lets you sleep, is being disrupted by the cell phone patterns that are emitting from the cell phone every so often, and it is impacting the way you sleep. So there's much more kinds of impact beyond the cell itself.
Okay. Let's touch on what can we do to reduce functions of the cell phones or prevent the damage from a cell phone in particular?
By reducing the amount of time. Time reduced is good for the body. So that's a very simple thing you think about. The duration of the use of all of our technologies around our bodies. Where you put it, how close it is to you, is impacting. In fact, the rule of thumb is if you're using a cell phone and it's directly to your head, that's sort of the worst condition that can be created by a cell phone. If you take it and put it 1 foot away from you, 80% of it's gone. It will not impact. It's a logarithmic function. The power levels drop really, really fast. If you're 4 foot away, it's 98%. It's almost like just by 4 foot away, you're really, really pretty safe. So you really want to think about that. And something we haven't mentioned, but I should. The number of transmitters in a room, you always have to reduce that. In other words, we talked about a Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and a cell phone transmitter. Do you use Wi-Fi all the time? Do you use your Bluetooth? I don't. If you can turn them off, you turn the potential risk of that exposure down by 2/3. And in fact, the general rule of thumb is 1 bee can bother you, but that's it, unless you're allergic. 1,000 bees will kill you. So you think of that analogy. Anytime you look at your environment, how can you reduce the transmitters in the space? How you can reduce transmitters in your room? When you use a laptop, for example, do you need Bluetooth or do you need Wi-Fi? You can actually cut an Ethernet plug it into the wall or into the Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden those transmitters are turned off. That's pretty important. Believe it or not, turning those couple things off really reduces risks a bunch.
Yeah, so agreed 100%. About a month ago, I was wisening up to some of this stuff. So I've started turning off my Bluetooth off at all times unless I need it to sync up with my Oura Ring. But before that, it was always on, and I didn't even realize it was doing all this damage or potential damage to my body. Then what I've started doing is when I go to bed now, I turn my phone on airplane mode, and I use it to kind of track my movements in bed, to track my sleep. But it's in airplane mode, and I take off or I turn off the power to my Wi-Fi, so my modem. So that's off as well. But I also happen to live in an apartment complex building in Los Angeles, which I'm sure there's 100 signals all around me, which again is not great. But as you said, distance is good, so I'm not literally right next to them. So I want to move on. So that's the cell phone. To turn off, what you're saying is turn off the transmitters you're not using, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, as much as you can, and only use it when you need to.
And by the way, it is sort of important, particularly in a bedroom. When you have the cell phone like that, you really want to move it away. Or as you just mentioned, you put it in airplane mode. But you don't want Wi-Fi routers in those rooms. You want only a minimum number of clocks. You want to take all the potential transmitters within that room out.
Yeah. Ideally, you run Ethernet cabling around your house and just stop using Wi-Fi completely. Daniel, let's go to laptops next. What are the different types of emissions on laptops, and how are they different from cell phones?
Actually, there's not much difference, except that there's probably more ELF, extreme low frequency stuff, coming off of there. When you have it plugged into the wall and you're powering up your laptop, there's they refer to it as milligauss. So you can have a fairly higher level of 60 cycle stuff going on that could potentially infect you, but the transmitters to the Wi-Fi There are actually two types. And so you really want to go, as you suggested, with an Ethernet connection. And by going Ethernet, you improve your speeds and you reduce risks.
Got it. Just reading your book a few days ago, I realized that for the past year on my Mac, my Bluetooth connector had been on, and I'd never used my Bluetooth on my Mac. And I said, what am I doing? So I went in and physically turned it off, and now it's off. So it gives me a little bit more confidence. But as you said, the Wi-Fi is also something we have to look at on these computers. And so now I'm going to look at how do I just run an Ethernet cable straight to my computer.
Oh, yeah. In fact, you were talking about you turn it off at night. Well, I always suggest go get a $10 timer, that on-off kind of. Plug it into the wall, put your Wi-Fi on, and at night, at a certain point in time, have it turn off, and in the morning, turn it on. You never have to worry about it again, and you're going to be more safe.
That's amazing. So let's talk about areas where laptops can cause damage. I typically set my laptop on my desk in front of me, so it's at least a foot, if not two, the circuitry is from me. However, I sometimes, and I see a lot of friends that are working from their laptops on their lap, which that can be good because now you've got the circuitry that's emitting the ELFs, as you said, but also all the transmitters right up against your groin area. We've covered cell phones, we've covered laptops. What about tablets? Do they have anything that's different from the other two?
Yeah, actually, it's less DC, extreme low frequency stuff. They tend to be less invasive when it comes to that. But the Wi-Fi is literally the same Wi-Fi transmitters that's on your tablet, that's on a cell phone, that's on your laptop. So they bring sort of a similar concern as all other devices we've talked about.
Okay, so turn your Bluetooth off on your tablet when you're not using it, and also keep it away from your lap, because I think the tablet in particular, you just kind of hold it away from you and it ends up on your lap more likely than not.
Right, yeah. And by the way, we talked about kids with a cell phone before going right through their head. Think about the groin area of a child. It's really the soft tissue that's the most potentially endangered. And when you have a child that's using a laptop or a tablet and they have it in their lap, it's probably 3 times more dangerous to the child than it is to the adult, only because of their biological makeup.
Yeah. Yeah, so men or children, if you're listening, please keep these devices away from your groin area. Do not fry your balls.
Right.
Exactly. And women, don't mess up your ovaries and your eggs.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to smart meters. This is something else you talk about in your book, Daniel. So for the audience, what do you mean by smart meters?
You used to have a utility person come to your land, look on a wall at a meter and write down how much power you used. A smart meter eliminates that individual having to be dispatched. It basically is a cell phone that connects to a central device, which can now look at what usage your house has with power consumption. And so that smart device is now transmitting essentially a cell signal periodically, depending on the function it's in, every second or so, or it could be every 10, 20 minutes or so. So these transmissions are another bee in the room. People ask, is this something we should be concerned about? And I often respond by asking where their meters are. Because if it's on the garage door and you have your cars and then you have your living quarters, you've got over 24 foot between you and the transmitters. In other words, the distance keeps you pretty safe. If you have a meter, a smart meter, and it's literally on the wall where you have your head when you sleep at night in your bedroom, move your bed, because that's a constant transmission throughout the night that you really want to avoid if you can. And so smart meters, there's a lot of debate about it because they're just another bee in the room. And why create more environmental toxins within the environment if you can avoid it? And that's why there's controversy about that stuff.
That makes sense. I've been meaning to walk outside the building and kind of check out where the smart meters are, and I'll do that today. Let's move on to, we touched on this, the microwaves, Daniel. You said they emit 2 to 3 gigahertz of frequencies, which of course can be damaging. Now, do you recommend we completely eliminate cooking or heating food in the microwave?
For a different reason, I do. And the reason why, it creates carcinogenics within the food. When you're cooking something, it actually changes the atomic definition of that cell. It can become a carcinogenic. So for that alone, you don't want to use it. If you do choose to do it, then when you cook a food, you definitely want to stay away from it by at minimum 4 foot, more like 20 foot if you can.
Most people, when they're cooking food in the microwave, just stand and stare at the food about a foot or two away. So,
right.
And I'm guilty of that.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, so I'm going to cut down on microwave use or eliminate if I can. And even if I do use it, I'll just walk away.
Right, exactly. And you can do that, because that little bit of distance you put between really does change the impact it'll have on your body. Mm-hmm. And it's a simple thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next item on my list, which is X-rays. What are your thoughts on these rays and the radio frequency being emitted out of those?
An X-ray is, we talked about 2 gigahertz. Well, we begin talking about terahertz, trillions of cycles per second. When you talk about an X-ray, a gamma ray, an atomic bomb, you're talking about the potential damage to a cell. It's called ionized radiation. And what ionized radiation is where they take a cell and there's a neutron and electrons. Electrons are running around the neutron. And there's so much energy that's being created by this electromagnetic radiation. It knocks out the electron and it charges it. That's why they call it ionized. And so what happens is there's a more direct path to the breakdown of the cell. It's more obvious. Historically, people have known X-rays can be seriously damaging and dangerous to the body with a long history. I often point out RF signals have been around probably, for the last 50 years. Personal uses last 10 years or so. And, you asked me before, is there something we should worry about? Well, when the lady who invented X-rays died of radiation poisoning. In other words, here the inventor didn't know that ionized radiation could be bothersome and can have a lethal effect on the body. So a word to the wise. RF has been around us. It's not going to knock the electron out of its orbit. It won't do that. But it's the constant exposures to the cell that breaks down the cell and its functions in the body that you need to worry about.
Yeah. Luckily, as a society, we only do these X-rays when we go to the hospital or to the dentist. It's very rare. So I guess that gives me some comfort. But I was at my dentist about 4 weeks ago, and it was time for my yearly, dental X-rays. And I sat there, and she put this thing in my body, or not in my body, in my mouth. And it's kind of like, I believe a lead device that prevents it from going anywhere. And then she literally walked away to the other room and disappeared. And I go, where are you going? I'm sitting here with my mouth open and you're in a different room, hitting a button.
And she looks out of the side to see if you're still there or not. And then she comes back in.
Oh, man. Yeah, you're right. I was like, where are you going? Why am I in this room by myself? So I'm actually going to start considering not doing dental X-rays every year, maybe move it to every 2 years.
Oh, yeah. It's not just the X-ray, it's the actual controls within the X-ray. They drift. So even though they've been set to one thing, it actually can be something else. There's a lot of regimen around that, but it used to be like when you go to an airport and you run through the X-ray machine, they were notorious for lack of control. So when you had a shot of X-rays, it becomes accumulative. Every time you go through, the body says, I didn't like that even more and more and more. So you really want to avoid it if you can.
I want to circle the wagons and come back to these home devices. The gist of what you're saying, Daniel, is the devices that you use day to day, turn off the transmitters where you're not using them. Would this apply to alarm clocks and hair dryers and refrigerators and toasters? How dangerous are some of these other devices that we plug in?
Well, a good thing about it is when you have toast and you're making toast, you probably put the toast in and you walked away.
Yeah.
So you have distance. When you dry your hair, it may take 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It's a short duration. But believe it or not, we were talking before about levels. A safe level is less than 3 milligauss. That's a measurement of extremely low frequency stuff. You can have a hair dryer, 150 milligauss. So it's 150 times that which is considered acceptable, but the durations are short. So every device that you find in your environment emits something. And just out of a general rule of thumb, when you use them, try to minimize it and keep your risks down.
We've got all of these devices that are generating emissions and frequencies that we should guard ourselves against. You came up with a set of products, I should say, and a company to protect people or to help people protect themselves from these. Tell us a little bit more about your company.
Remember, I was telling you the story about how I got involved in this. I actually built my son's products that shielded them from these technologies. They had friends who liked it and wanted me to build them some, and so on and so on. Neighbors wanted it. All of a sudden, I got in the business of providing protection devices. Right. I had no intention of being involved in this, but I couldn't find anything that protected my sons. So I built DefenderShield, a company that builds devices that shield from these technologies around us. You don't need any of my products if you manage your environment. If you take the right precautionary measures and you minimize exposure times, duration times, you're fine. But if you're like me, I like to use my cell phone. So when I do, I like the protection. And we take an omnidirectional signal, we stop it in one direction towards the head, and we let the cell tower touch the transmitters. And so you can use it talking to your friends, and you're still protected. So I created DefenderShield, and we have a whole variety of different products, from blue light blocking earbuds that have no signals running through the wiring, and cell phone protection, tablet protection, laptop protection.
That's really cool, by the way. And the arc of civilization, at least now, it's 98% of people have cell phone and smartphones. So now we're already past that stage. There's little we can do to tell people to go away from their cell phone habits. So I think what you've created in terms of products are really cool, because I could go, and I'm worried about my cell phone in my pocket, and even I, knowing as much as I know, I sometimes forget to leave Bluetooth on or to leave the Wi-Fi on, and so it's in my pocket and it's pinging the whole time. I'd rather just go buy a product that somebody like yourself has made that's protecting me even when I forget. So I'm going to go get your products and start using them. Some of the ones, as we discussed in our conversations, are especially for cell phone in our pocket. So there's a case for the cell phone. You've got, when you put the laptop on your lap, you've got a shielding device under the laptop that kind of protects you from radiating into your skin, correct?
Yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
It prevents the signal from passing.
Great. So I'll link all of that information and links to your website and your products, Daniel, on the show notes of the page. I have another question for you that I ask every guest on this show. What are your top three anti-aging hacks or tips for our listeners?
Exercise. I actually do yoga and have for the last 10 years. And it's incredible how effective it can be to offset the body degradation over time. So I've found that my practice has kept me limber. I have balance. I have all the kinds of things I'm looking for, and the body's aging seems to be been curtailed a bit. The second is eating. I'm pretty careful about what I eat. I try to eat balanced fruits and vegetables. I don't eat red meat. It's not that I don't like red meat. I just stay away from red meat. I enjoy fish and other kinds of things, but I eat a very healthy, very stable environment. I minimize the sugar intake. I do a lot of the kinds of things that help me sustain a fairly active lifestyle. And the last is sleep, believe it or not. You really your circadian rhythm is so important, and people don't quite realize it. When your circadian rhythm is off, there are subtending body breakdowns far beyond your sleep pattern that gets disrupted. And so I consider sleep and its consistency with circadian rhythm that it really is something that you should spend time making sure is where you want to be with it.
Yeah, agreed. I am finally maturing enough to get into a yoga practice.
Oh, that's good.
And men we're so macho, right? In our 20s and early 30s, we just want to throw weights around and lift as heavy as we can. And that's how we get our sense of camaraderie and like bonding with other men is how much you lift and what your bench press is.
Right.
But now I've finally started doing yoga and structural and musculoskeletal movements. Because if I'm going to live a long time, then my body structure better be up to it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no question whatsoever. When I grew up in all the various sports that I was in, I wouldn't be quite dead in a yoga class.
Right.
How stupid that was. The reality of it is, it's really, really the kind of thing that does balance mind and body. And it really simple practice. You don't have to do it every day. You don't have to do it every other day. A couple times a week, typically it's enough. And you really sustain a high level of body balance as a result. Yeah,
the other couple excuses that I made. One, it's all women in that class. I don't want to be seen in there. And number two is at least at my gym down the street, it's a 90-minute class. I'm like, well, that's 2 hours with all the time. Right. I'll go there and come back. Can it be not quicker? Or, these are the excuses I've been making.
Oh, yeah.
And finally, I said, no more excuses. I'm going to have a yoga practice, and I'm going to get mobile and very, very flexible.
Yeah, it turns out that making excuses is only reducing your life span. So, that doesn't make too much sense if you want to control a little bit about your longevity. And you really, really, I don't know about you, but I really feel great when I come out. Even though I may have gotten tired because I had a long day, I find that it's such a balance for my body and mind, having a chance to do it.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing those tips. I actually don't know how old you are, but we were chatting last week, and you seem like a sprightly young man. So I'll give you credit. You're doing something right.
Yeah, I'm 67 years old.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to be careful about what you eat and how you exercise, and that's what you got to be careful. You do right.
Yeah.
You don't get. This is not a practice run.
Yeah, right. This is your one chance.
Right. Exactly.
It's not a video game. You can't come back.
Exactly. Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Daniel, this has been so informative. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
DefenderShield.com. You can get access to information. We have a learning section. We have podcasts. We have blogs. We try to keep everyone as informed as possible about this subject and the most current and understood information about it. And if you're looking for our products only, you have a choice not only with our website, but you can go to Amazon. DefenderShield products are in Amazon with full lines of products there as well.
Got it. And so I'll link to all of this information as well as your book, Radiation Nation, on the show notes. You've also been very kind to give our listeners an exclusive 20% off on all purchases on your website. So if you're listening and you want to purchase something, just go to the website DefenderShield.com and use the code ANTIAGING20 to get 20% off your entire purchase. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, no, thank you very much for inviting me. I really do appreciate it.
You can find all the information we discussed in this episode and links to studies in the show notes at antiaginghacks.net. To make sure you get notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at antiaginghacks and on Facebook at facebook.com/antiaginghacks. And now for the disclaimers. This podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. Please seek the advice of your health professional for any health or medical conditions.